And please say your last name again.
Jones, Jones.
Can you
Well,
talk
yeah.
about, yeah, no, at least we've got that one.
It's Lieutenant Brian Jones.
Yes, sir.
Can you please just talk about the unit? How many officers do you currently have? What is the training?
Our CIT unit, which is Crisis Intervention Team, is currently staffed by 7 officers, and they are supervised by a sergeant. And their role basically is to be the liaison between the mental health department's mental health officers that are currently assigned to patrol, and getting the people that come into the system that are consumers of mental health resources, putting them into the right place to where they can be put in touch with agencies, advocacy groups, and to be able to get them the resources that they need. They also provide training to the department on CIT related issues, and they work closely with several outside agencies other than APD, such as the local mental health authority, which is the Austin Travis County Integral Care, and their response group, which is expanded mobile crisis outreach team.
So what is the difference, well, how many do you have mental health officers on patrol?
Well, currently we have about 200 officers that are currently assigned to patrol that have gone through the crisis intervention training. Out of those 200, we have 158 that are receiving the stipends that are required for mental health officers to conduct emergency detentions.
And so how does the training vary between the two?
They're both a lot of the same training. See, by TCOL standards, TCOL requires that cadets in the police academy receive 16 hours of crisis intervention team training. We currently provide our cadets with 40 hours of CIT training. And once those cadets graduate, they take that education into the field. After they're assigned to patrol for 2 years, they're eligible to take additional CIT training to certify them as a patrol CIT officer. And that's an additional 40-hour class. And from that class, once you have the combined 80 hours total, you are able to respond to mental health calls or any type of call that has a mental health component attached to it, and you're also able to conduct an emergency detention.
How exactly do officers respond to somebody who's experiencing like a mental health crisis and they're acting out physically or violently to innocent bystanders in public?
Well, you can have hypotheticals all day long. You can what if any type of scenario, but it really depends. Each situation is different from the others. Our number one priority is preservation of life, obviously. That's what we all strive for in any call that we respond to. But if you are suspicious or you have information in a call that an officer is responding to that there's a mental health component attached to it, somebody that may be experiencing a mental health crisis, obviously stabilization of the scene is the most important thing. Before a mental health officer can even speak to that person and try to provide resources, the scene has to be stabilized so that no one else is hurt.
Is there going to be a special response whenever children are at the scene of the incident?
It's a response regardless of whether it would be a mental health call or not. Obviously, just like I said before, preservation of life is our utmost priority when we respond to any call, and it just depends on the situation.
But is there special training if children are involved?
Not necessarily as it regards to just children being present in a home. It's all about de-escalating the situation and trying to find the right resources to the person if they're experiencing a mental health call. And the preservation of life obviously is our number one priority. So when officers respond to a scene, that's the first thing that they have to do before they can address any type of mental health issue.
Do officers approach mental health calls differently than a normal call? For instance, if someone were to call in and not report a mental health issue, officers respond to the scene. Are they trained to identify a mental health issue when they arrive?
Well, yes and no. First of all, you have to understand that before you even know that there's a mental health aspect to any type of call, if a person is deemed a danger to anybody else, or if somebody's calling in a person has a knife, or they're threatening somebody with a gun, you have to stabilize the scene before you can do anything. And once it's recognized that there's a mental health aspect to that call, or this person is experiencing a mental health crisis, then we can get those resources to that person that they need.
Can you speak? Okay.
Well, a different protocol though, maybe you don't want them to know you're there. Should it be like a suicide by cop situation? Is there a way you can stay back? I mean, is there a different protocol?
It depends on the call. It depends on your environment, your surroundings. If you're in a crowded area, such as an apartment complex or a shopping mall or a school, it just depends. It varies by the circumstances of the call.
Can you speak to any of the techniques that CIT officers do use when they make that determination, they stabilize the scene? You know, what's one way to kind of calm these sorts of situations down?
Well, once the scene is stabilized and it's recognized that there's a mental health aspect to any call, a CIT patrol officer is called to the scene to evaluate that person. They're trained in de-escalation. All officers are trained in de-escalation, but it's incumbent upon the CIT officers to assess and evaluate the person to see if they would be a likely candidate either for an emergency detention or part of our jail diversion program, in which we would call out our partners from the local mental health community, local mental health authority, to respond to the call and see if they would be able to provide resources for that person at the time of the crisis.
Do a lot of these calls result in hospitalization as opposed to jail time? Do you see a mix of, you know, the follow-up?
Well, it depends. Last year, Austin Police Department coded approximately 11,000 calls as having a mental health component. Out of those 11,000 calls, there were about 5,200 emergency detentions conducted last year, which is an astronomical number. However, within the last couple of years, we've really sought to try to minimize those numbers, both in incarceration rates and in hospitalization through emergency detentions, by partnering with other resources that we have available to us. Because we recognize here at the police department, and throughout the country really, that police officers are not the authority on mental health issues. We are not trained mental health clinicians. However, when these problems come to the forefront and bubble up to the surface, the first people that anyone is going to call, they're going to pick up the phone, call 911. Who responds? The police do. However, we've realized that even though we're faced with this situation many times, that we can partner with other agencies, other resources are at our disposal to try to mitigate these circumstances. So within the last couple of years, we've created the jail diversion, hospital diversion program at APD, in which if a person is experiencing a mental health crisis, but they meet the criteria for not necessarily having to be arrested or hospitalized, we have resources available to us. We can any officer, not just a CIT patrol officer, can request services of MCOT, which is Expanded Mobile Crisis Outreach Team. They are licensed clinicians that can arrive to the scene and assess the people's mental health condition at the time. And through their assessment, if they feel that they are comfortable with handling the issues by themselves, they can release the officer to go back in service so the officer is not tied up. And they can offer services to that person at the point of contact. And also, another thing to mention would be that through their services and their availability to help us on these mental health calls, they can leave the person in the community. So they don't have to be arrested or hospitalized under an emergency detention, which is very costly and time-consuming, not only for the hospitals, but also the courts as well.
So can you tell us what you think are some of the improvements, I guess, you know, the techniques you all need, and also if you are going to include training, de-escalation training that is coming up in January, are you going to include how to treat situations with mental health, people with arms?
What you're alluding to is mental health calls that have weapons involved. Those are rapidly dynamic situations, and it's hard to speak in hypotheticals when you're not faced with the situation at the time.
How common is it for a citizen to request a mental health call versus another officers to call you guys in?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I don't think it's incredibly common for that to happen. If someone were to request CIT intervention for someone, and I'm just supposing here, but I would venture to say that that's probably because that person has had some type of involvement with mental health issues before, and whoever's calling in is recognizing that.
How do you stage your 7 officers that are on the CIT team and then the 200 patrol officers? Because as I understand, they work around the clock and you have some in each division at all times. Can you talk about that division?
The CIT unit, which is the 7 officers and sergeant, they are housed out at the Austin State Hospital, but the CIT patrol officers are dispersed equally throughout the city by region.
And they work around the clock.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes.
Considering
I'm sorry. There's typically officers that are CIT, the patrol CIT certified officers that are assigned to days, evenings, and the night patrol shifts.
You said that these officers have about 40 additional hours of training. Considering how dynamic these situations are, is there any difference in use of force, or is there additional use of force training these officers receive to deal with these individuals?
Well, we've actually found that the use of force is on par with most other calls, that just because it's a mental health type call, use of force, we've seen the numbers, and the numbers don't show that use of force is increased based on dealing with mental health calls.
And so it doesn't require any additional training, or it's just...
Well, all officers go through intense training as it pertains to use of force. So no, it wouldn't make a difference. Officers still are required, and they still have to report it just as they always would. But it's always important to remember that officers still have to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. And just because a person is suffering from a mental health crisis doesn't negate the fact that an officer still has to do what they have to do to protect themselves and other people at the scene of the call.
Would you ever characterize these calls as more dangerous or less dangerous than?
I would never want to say something like that, because you never can tell. All I can say is that they're highly dynamic, rapidly changing. You just don't know what just like with any call, whether it's mental health related or not, you don't exactly know what you're dealing with until you're there. And when you're suddenly faced with a set of circumstances, you have to react based on your training.
We'll take one last question.
How much of a need is there for increasing CIT in the Austin Police Department?
Well, there's a mental health crisis around the country, not just in Austin, but around the entire country. We've seen instances of mental health related problems skyrocket the last several years. But I'd like to reiterate what I think that we're doing at APD is pretty special. This doesn't happen around the entire country, and I believe that the Austin Police Department is at the forefront in trying to deal with mental health issues here in Austin. The way that we've partnered with the local mental health authority, National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, and other outside organizations that can assist us and bring resources to the table when we're called to the scene of people experiencing crisis.
So he was saying, will you be increasing the numbers or the training? That's what I was wondering. In the future, because you were just saying this is a huge number of calls you're responding to and commitments. Do you foresee expanding from the 200?
Well, obviously that's a budgetary issue that I don't really have any control over.
Thank you.
Say and spell your name one more time.